Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. This is Connie's Corner, and today I am reviewing a show I saw yesterday. It's called Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill. It opened originally, I believe, at the American Repertory Theater back in 2018, I believe, and then it had a brief stunt on Broadway, made even briefer by the pandemic. So it opened right before the pandemic, and of course, the pandemic shut it down. And in the fall of 2021, Broadway shows were not all of them, but some of them resumed. Jagged Little Pill was one of them, but it closed just not even 3 months later. So I'm going to describe this. I can't talk about the show without spoiling it, so I'm going to give my non-spoiler thoughts out of the way for anyone who is planning on seeing it because it is on tour. That's how I saw it. I was going to see it on Broadway, but it closed before I could get there. It is touring, I think, through August of 2023. I think that's what's listed at the moment. Obviously, they can add more dates, or after a respite, maybe it'll tour again, something like that. So if you are planning on seeing this and you don't want to be spoiled, I'm going to give you my overall thoughts first, and then we'll dive into the deeper stuff. So, what is Jagged Little Pill? Quick summary of the source material. It is a jukebox musical. And if you don't know what that term means, it's not something where you create a narrative or adapt an existing story but add music to it. It's like you reverse engineer, where you take a body of musical work and try to write a narrative around it. Most of them are around a single artist or a single group. Not always. There are exceptions to that as well. So this one is like Alanis Morissette the musical, but it's not Alanis Morissette the biopic, which a lot of them go down. It goes more the Mamma Mia route, where Mamma Mia was ABBA's songs, but it had nothing to do with ABBA. So that's an example that people relate to. So Jagged Little Pill is similar. Jagged Little Pill, back in 1995, Alanis Morissette released, I believe it was her third album. It was huge. I'm a child of, well, I became a teen in the 90s. So Jagged Little Pill, the music album, was the very first CD I ever bought with my own money. And it was like the first adult thing I bought. So even though I was just a skosh too young for it, like I really probably should have heard it a year or two after I heard it. It spoke to me. Now, I didn't get everything she was talking about, but if you know who Alanis Morissette is, I don't have to explain this to you. So for those of you who are like, who's that? Or I kind of know who that is. She's kind of known for being like the alternative grunge, like post rock angry chick. She like originated that. Well, she didn't originate it. She just gave it a fresh take. Very, very 90s. So you didn't exist in 1995 without at least knowing some of her hit songs from that album. So I have a personal connection, which is why I wanted to see this. I'm not a huge fan of jukebox musicals. Well, it depends. If they go the biopic route, I think that's like putting a straitjacket on it, because not an artist's entire body of work represents what's going on with them in their life. So forcing the songs to fit a narrative of a person's life is difficult. Once I established that this was not her biopic, but that it was an original story using her music, I was more comfortable. Plus, I just like her songs. So you definitely want to go in at least as a casual fan of that. All right, so if it's not a biopic, what is it about? Okay, again, I'm just gonna give you a very brief summary. To not a non-spoiler description is it follows a pivotal year. We follow this middle class, I want to say, family in Connecticut. It's like a year in the life, but it's a very important year in this family's life. It touches on a lot of hot topics, which we're going to dive deep into later. But the overall message, I think, is showing how messy life is, but there are reasons for hope and a pathway to healing. Healing's a big theme in this show. So that, I know that sounds very nondescript, but to say more is to ruin the show. First, I'm going to talk about what I liked and then what I didn't like, and then we'll get into the spoiler stuff. So what did I love? That's not a spoiler thing. Well, the cast was solid. My absolute favorite was, she technically is the main character, but I would argue that there isn't a main character in this because we're following too many people. But according to the structure of the layout, things like the curtain call and who we spend the most time with, is Mary Jane Healy, It's the Healy family that we're following, played by Heidi Blickenstaff. She was so good. I have not seen a single character that I just love. I love a lot of shows, but it's usually for the music or I love the overall idea. But I really like this show because of that character. Mary Jane Healy is just so funny, so injured, so broken, damaged. She's trying to be perfect, but she's not perfect, and so it's coming to grips with that. Um, but what I love most is most musicals, because I watch a lot of traditional stuff. I'm not very good at watching modern things, so that's the reason why I wanted to see this show. It's you know a contemporary work. Traditional stuff, the flaw with them is you have two kinds of women in a musical. You have the ingenue, the waif, the girl who we need to get her married or something, right? It's all she's there to fall in love with the guy. That's like her job. Or you have like the opposite. It's the wise old sage kind of character. Like, oh, she's seen some things and she's just there to either be a support system for the ingenue or just to give some advice. Not a lot of range for female parts. Mary Jane is not 20 something, but she's not 60 something. She's right in the middle, like myself, so it's nice to have someone that you're like, oh, here's someone who's like, this is the middle of their life. How refreshing. Very funny character, very real character. All the characters in this show have things that when you really study it, and you don't even have to, as you watch it unfold in front of you, you're like, wow, I don't like this person right now. And that's okay. So that's what makes them real. We don't want them to be one-dimensional or so perfect that you're like, oh, I'm going to aspire to be this, but I'll never actually obtain it. It's just something to strive for. Sometimes it's nice just to see people being people, right? So she was my personal favorite. But everyone who performed did a very good job. There was no, oh, this person's just here. But that's the shout out I want to do. The set is very sparse. And normally I hate that. But you have to do what's appropriate for the work that's being put together. So it wasn't sparse for sparse sake. It had a lot of different settings. Like we moved around a lot, and they would just wheel on just a couch or just a countertop or just a bookcase. It was enough to say, now we're somewhere different, because people intuitively, the more theater that you watch, the more you understand theater conventions. Like, we don't need an entire library to appear on stage to know that we're in a library. You could have one little bookcase of shelves and it's like, right, we're at the library, right? Everything was on wheels, and almost every single piece, when it came on stage, it didn't just sit there. Because it's a musical and because it's about the craziness of life, things would spin a lot, and you might get tired of that after a while. But they did it in such inventive, different ways that it didn't feel like they were doing the same trick over and over again. So I actually liked the set. I've heard some people complain that they're like, when they saw it on Broadway, they're like, I'm seeing a Broadway level show, and where's the set? I get it. I'm not a fan of the empty space either, but I think it was appropriate for this specific show. So I love the set. Also, all the spinning added to the kinetic energy of the show, because again, the show is moving really fast. They don't have time to stop and breathe. It's really on to the next thing, on to the next thing. We got to get to the next bit. The show is just under 3 hours, depending on the runtime. Like our shows, the production, exact performance I saw started a few minutes late, and it came back from intermission a few minutes later than it probably should have. Every crowd is different and every house manager is different. So it says it's 2 hours and 30 minutes, but I think it's closer to like 2 hours and 40 some minutes, just depending, right? But it moves very fast. There was video projection used as well, but sparingly. Again, it's not there for its own sake. Like, oh, look, we can do video projection. A lot of it was subtle. A lot of it was still images just being pushed up there. So you're like, right, we're in a house. Oh, right, we're at the doctor's office, whatever it is, okay? Because it's a contemporary show. Now, the costumes, it's hard to judge costumes that I'm guessing this show is taking place in the now. This is my first complaint. I don't know when this show is supposed to be taking place. They make all these references to a yester time, meaning just 20 years ago or something. But they had cell phones in this show, they have laptops, social media is at least mentioned and visualized in the set a little bit. Teen life is a big part of the show, and so you had teens in this show, but they were dressed, it looked very 90s. As a person who lived through the 90s, I'm like, wow, look at all that flannel. It wasn't exclusively flannel, there was just a lot of it. So it had that grunge, uh you know underground Seattle look with the ensemble. There is an ensemble in the show, and I was like, right, is it because Alanis Morissette's music is very 90s? Is it an homage to her and her time? I couldn't tell. So I felt like when we were was confusing, and I actually blame the costumes for that. It's not that they were bad. I mean, the actors were dressed, they were wearing things that fitted them properly, and you knew who you were looking at, like, oh, that this is that person. They had enough visual clues of who you're looking at. So it's hard to judge contemporary costumes. My only real complaint is this taking place in the 90s? It shouldn't be, because we didn't have laptops and cell phones the way they exist in the show. But is it happening right now? And right now, meaning the show was open. That's why I mentioned 2018. That's when the show initially opened. So was it like, this is 2018? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter. But yeah. In this exact performance, sound was a problem. Their mics went in and out at times. It was really weird. So I don't know if it's, I worked in theater. I don't know if it's the person backstage controlling the mics going, oh, it's time to turn their mic up, it's time to bring it down. And so maybe they were just slow to bring somebody up at times. Was it the sound system itself? Like, was it just acting up? Because sound is evil. I quickly gravitated toward lighting when I had my pick of what do I want to do backstage. I hate sound. Sound is evil, no one's fault. Was it the venue we're in? Like, if I had watched this in a different space, would I have had a different sound experience? So that was a thing of that unique performance, not really a criticism of the show itself. Overall, I had a really good time. I would recommend it to anyone who likes musicals, who likes Alanis Morissette. If you don't like Alanis Morissette, I would not go to this show. And I would say that about any jukebox musical. If you're like, oh, I don't want to see Jimmy Buffett the musical, well, then don't go watch that if you're not a fan, right? Something like that. However, what it's not that this is a bad thing. I want to be very clear, use my words wisely. I want to get to this show deals with a lot of topics, a lot. And in the program, look at how small, let me see, make sure I point. See this tiny little sentence here? It's not even bold or anything. So in really small print at the bottom of this page, it says, this show contains strong language, adult themes, drug use, moments of sexual violence that some may find upsetting. That is like the softest, most benign disclaimer I have ever read. If this show is very similar to Next to Normal or Dear Evan Hansen, so if you've seen those shows, or at least know what categorically what kind of shows they are, if you're not a fan, you won't like this either. If you love those shows, this is right up that same alley. It's doing its own thing, but I would put them in the same group. They all are going for the same idea, and they're using a lot of the same methods to execute their point. So those are my overall non-spoiler thoughts. So we're going to get to the meat of this thing. This is going to be the longer portion of the video. So bear with me. Okay, so let's get into the spoiler stuff. All right, strap in. This is going to take a minute, and it's the show's fault. If the show didn't want to have this big, long conversation, they shouldn't have gone here. I think they do. I think they want a larger conversation to happen. I do think that's the point, and that's fine. But what hot button topics are they talking about? Well, I actually made a list, so I'm going to read off of this for you. Some, and maybe this is not even all of them. These are just the ones I could remember because I've only seen the show once. All right. drug addiction, marital issues, misogyny, porn addiction, racism, LGBTQ plus representation, rape culture, adoption, gender identity, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, victim blaming, trauma, activism, white privilege, school shootings, fidelity, abuse, and toxic community culture. To name the ones that I can name. It's quite a list. All right. Woo! So before I dive into the plot, that's a lot. I think the real problem with the show, it didn't bother me that much, but it's gonna keep me from watching it again and again and again. Too many plot threads. They would start to talk about a topic and then they didn't really come back to it. So I don't know what this show is trying to do. It's like it wants you to care about all these things, but it's all coming at you once. This is a very in-your-face show. They are not subtle. They are not quiet. This is Alanis Morissette. Okay, she is loud and she's in your face. So is her show. She did write the show with help, not alone. So you have a character who's an activist, and so this character and the ensemble throughout the entire show are holding up signs, me too, hashtag me too, Black Lives Matter, and my body, my choice. And, think of a hashtag. It's in this show. It's a lot. And the problem of condensing it into this little show is by the time you get to the end, where I think the signs are used for one song in particular very, very well, but it's like too late. You're so used to it by then that it doesn't have the impact that I think the show wants it to have because they overdo it. So it just doesn't have that, you know. So I think it's too much. My fear is the longevity of this show. Is this a show we can watch 10 years from now? Is this a show that my grandchildren can watch and appreciate what they're talking about? It's not a bad thing to have a show that's about this moment, but you don't want it to be so of this moment that it immediately dates itself, just months or a couple years later. And people go, oh, I don't need to watch that because it's no longer relevant, or we've moved on to more sophisticated way of talking about those same topics. It's not that the topics are not relevant. It's the language used to talk about it right now versus 10 years ago versus 40 years ago. Now, theater is not necessarily designed to be a long-term thing. You create it, it happens, and then it's gone. Theater is alive, as people say. So it is just no two performances are the same. What we're writing about now should be talking about now. Later can talk about later, all that stuff. So maybe it's not important to think about the long-term life that a given show could have, and especially this one. But I do think it's going to hurt it. So I compared it to Next to Normal and Dear Evan Hansen. All three of these shows are no longer on Broadway. They have all closed. I was shocked when Dear Evan Hansen closed. I thought that had such a huge cult following. But I also have seen criticism where they're like, wow, this show really, it's not a good look. You know what I mean? Like, it's good that they bring all this stuff up, but they find a way to make themselves look just as bad as the thing that the show is pushing against, if that makes sense. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one topic. The show did have some controversy. There is a character in the show who arguably is written as a non-binary character, but she was not played by a non-binary actress. And that caused some problems. Representation is a real problem. I'm not going to deny that. That is fact. You can prove that. So that's a problem that the show faced. And if you're going to talk about these topics, educate yourself so that if you're going to stand up there and preach to the rest of us, you have some authority because you did your homework. It's not good enough to say, look at how woke we are. We care about all these things, that huge laundry list that I just read to you. But they don't do the work themselves. Yes, we need to do work too. But if you're going to be too lazy to make sure that you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's, then I feel less incentive. It just feels lazy and basic. And I understand why the controversy is there. I agree with it to an extent. I'm not going to boycott this production, obviously. because it has a lot going for it. It has a lot to say. I think a lot of it's good. It certainly has good intentions, but it's weird that they want everyone to be so, um, you know, enlightened. And there's even a song. Alanis Morissette has a song called "Wake Up," and they sing it in the show, and it's all like, "Get your head out of the sand. Things are happening. You need to address it. You need to confront it. You need to evoke change somehow in whatever way that you have the power to do so." It's weird to preach all that, but they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Okay. So I know I'm burying the lead here. Why don't we go over the plot? Okay. All right. I actually had to write this down because a lot's happening. It's a lot coming at you. All right. So it has a really good framing device. It opens and closes with the Healy family gathered around at Christmas time. So it starts at Christmas, it's a year, and then the end of the show is the next Christmas. This is a family that does the classic family Christmas card letter thing. So our main character, Mary Jane, is writing the letter. So the first one reads the way it's supposed to read, like, "Oh, we're all doing great. We don't have any problems. We're so proud of our kids." It's, if you receive these letters, if you ever have, you know what they are like. Now, the second one is much more candid. She's much more real, like, "Okay, why don't we take off the veneer and show you what it's really like?" Okay. So what we learn is it's a family of 4. Mary Jane, we learn the point of the Christmas letter also at the top of the show is just to introduce everybody. Mary Jane is a wife and mother. She was in a car accident a few months prior to this and is secretly addicted to her painkillers. She's one of those, she had to get on painkillers, because of what happened to her. And this is a classic. Once this happens to people, some people, once they're on it, they can't get off. So we don't know that right away, but it doesn't take us long to figure out, like, oh, okay, she's got a pill problem. Hence the name Jagged Little Pill. The title is very fitting, not just because that's the name of Alanis Morissette's album. And then we meet her husband, Steve. He's I believe he's a lawyer. The occupation doesn't matter. He's very successful at work. But due to Mary Jane's low sex drive at the moment, because obviously when you're in an accident and you're not feeling well, you're not feeling sexy. You don't want to have sex. Like, we learn more reasons later, but they are having marital problems. She is not interested in having a physical relationship with him at the moment. And she's being cold and resentful toward him because he's spending a lot of time at work. So how he's coping with it is he just works more because he thinks he has to overcompensate. Like, if I work more, I'll provide more and I'm being a good husband. And obviously he has physical needs. So he's addicted to porn. That's not a major plot point, but all the characters have their things. They have a son, Nick, who just got accepted early into Harvard. He's like the perfect son. They've worked really hard to make him perfect. He's an athlete and gets great grades, obviously. This family decided to adopt another child. So they adopt a girl and they name her Frankie. She is a Black girl. We learn throughout the show that right away we learn that she's an activist, because she's living in this white, I guess they talk about the community, but only in a very small way. I guess the community is very white. They live in Connecticut, I guess some suburb there. They might name the town, but they don't say it enough for me to know it. I'm like, but we learn as the show goes on that she's bisexual. It opens with she clearly at least has a girlfriend. Her girlfriend is Jo. This is the character that initially was written as non-binary at the American Repertory Theater. And then once it moved to Broadway, they changed the dialogue so it's less nondescript, so she could be perceived as a cis character. Like, oh no, she's just a cis lesbian. Is she? Anyone who went to those early productions of it, there's YouTube videos out there and footage, and you can study that. I am not an expert on these things. I am not a non-binary person. I don't think I have the authority to talk about that, but it's there. So what matters from a plot standpoint is she's Frankie's friend, but they are also lovers to an extent. They don't really dive into how physical they are, but they're physical. Um, I just don't know if they've actually had sex. That's not actually explicitly said. Now, they're all high schoolers, so we have scenes that are in high school. At one point, we're in the high school and there's a new boy, of course. What a tired high school plot. There always has to be a new kid. His name is Phoenix, which I hate. I'm like, what? Oh, okay. He's the new boy in school, and so he and Frankie have a little meet cute moment, and it's actually very cute. It fits the description of what a meet cute is. So they're fast friends and they quickly develop feelings, but they end up having sex. Frankie cheats on Joe with Phoenix. That's one piece of the puzzle. The last character of any consequence is Bella. Bella is kind of portrayed as like one of the it girls. And there's a party scene that all the kids go to. Nick, Frankie, who are brother and sister by adoption. Phoenix and Bella. Joe is not allowed to go because her mother is super religious and doesn't understand her, and that whole beat. Okay, fine, right. Joe, no, excuse me. Frankie and Phoenix leave the party early, and they have a wonderful little moment where they're just talking, and like they're both talking about how messed up their families are, and it's all sweet and innocent and nice. Then we cut to the next morning. Joe comes over to visit with Frankie, because they're friends slash possibly lovers. And Joe's like, oh, have you seen these pictures circulating on the internet of Bella? They're not flattering pictures. And so they go visit her because at first, Frankie's mad because she's an activist and she actually starts a club at school. It's called SMAC. It's an acronym for something, but I don't remember. Point is, it's like we're here for the people who are disenfranchised, the marginalized, the oppressed, whatever you want to call them. Anyone who has a cause. Frankie's here to save the day. She needs a cape. So she wants to go talk to Bella because she's like, oh my God, I can't believe these pictures were taken of you without your consent because you were clearly drunk. She's naked in the pictures, at least to an extent. When they go over there, this is when the show gets real. This is deep into Act 1, by the way. Bella reveals that she was raped. And I was scared that what she was going to say was that Nick raped her. And I was like, oh, okay, I see where the plot's going. Nick, who's a perfect son, who never goes to parties, decided to go to this particular party and gets drunk for the first time. And maybe he rapes Bella. And that's going to ruin his chances at Harvard and blah, 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 blah. And then Bella's going to be pregnant. And then we're going to have like some botched abortion plot, right? Or because of all the messaging that they shove in the show before this point in the show, you think that's where it's going. No. I read a very long list to you. It does not talk about teen pregnancy, abortion, or suicide. Maybe they didn't want to touch suicide because they're like, well, dear Evan Hansen already touches that. No, some rando kid named Andrew, who we never meet, who, as far as I can tell, never speaks in this show, is the one who rapes her. So that's better. But it's revealed that Nick did walk in on it. Like he witnessed it. He was drunk. He's never been drunk before. So he's, first of all, he's doing like, oh, I don't know what to do when I feel this way because it's my first time. But revealing that he was there and did nothing, that's a major plot point. And as a woman, I'm hurt by that. I'm like, okay, he's a kid. What do you ask a kid to realistically do? It's not our nature to step in and do something. When you see two people fighting in a bar, your first instinct is not, hey, let's break them up, because you might get hurt, right? So your self-preservation instinct prevents you from doing the right thing. There's things that you should be doing, but you don't. So it's like, right, do we condemn him for this? He is only a child after all. He's still technically a child. So it's very gray. Let's see. So Bella is bullied on social media, of course. She struggles to report it, and she's not believed when she does report it. And sadly, this circles back to Nick. The reason why Nick reporting, being there to witness is important, first of all, to give his character something to do and have purpose to be in the show, but also Once he comes forward and corroborates her story, then she's believed. Well, that's very important. And they talk about, again, they're not subtle. This is not a show that's all like, we're just going to put a little thing out there and you figure it out. It's like they want to treat us like we're dumb. Like, okay, audience, just in case you missed that, isn't it a shame that no one believed the girl until the man said it happened? What does that say about us as a culture? All important stuff. All right. And then this is late in the show. It is revealed that Mary Jane was also raped in college. So there's a lot of moments in the show where Bella and MJ kind of mirror each other, but they don't come out and say this is why they mirror each other. Again, they wait until the very end and then, but they don't do anything with it. It's like, by the way, she was raped too. But this explains what's going on with Mary Jane. So once you know that, you then have to rewind and relook at the whole show and go, okay, she was raped in college, but some time passed. She got married. It's been at least 20 years. Then she was in this car accident, and there's a scene where Mary Jane and Steve are visiting a marriage counselor, and the counselor brings up the whole, okay, well, maybe the reason your wife doesn't want to have sex with you is because of her car accident. That's awoke some past trauma. Well, it did. It reminded her of somehow of being raped, going through that pain, having blood force trauma to your body yet again. This time it was a car accident, but there is an intrinsic link. So not only was she in a car accident and got addicted to painkillers, it's reopened this wound that she's not ready to confront. Like, she's denying it. She's pretending it didn't happen, or she's telling herself, oh, God has a plan. So there was a reason that happened to me and it's my fault. She does a lot of self-blame. So this is why they're struggling as a family. Bella had to get raped so that MJ could kind of confront the fact that she also was raped once upon a time, then got into a car accident. It awoke in some things, caused some discourse in her marriage, and now she has a painkiller problem. Meanwhile, she has these two kids. One is an adopted Black activist bisexual character who cheats on her girlfriend, and the prodigal son, he's perfect, but he witnesses this horrific thing and does nothing in the moment, but he eventually does something later. So when we get to the second letter, this all comes to a head and they all address things. Mary Jane has an overdose, goes to the hospital, realizes she needs help. She gets the help she needs. Frankie and Joe make amends. They don't get back together. Joe has an actual girlfriend now. Bella and Nick have a heart-to-heart, and so they're all cool again, and Mary Jane and Steve have started to work on their marriage. So the second letter is much more candid in that, oh, is our life perfect? No. Does it need to be? Of course not. But now I'm not going to pretend to be the perfect mom, perfect wife, where I make everything a competition and I try to be better than everyone or keep up with the other people. This is the real me. And the show's over. It's a lot. It's not like it's so much that you can't handle it as a viewer. Ugh. But it talks about all these things so fast. It's very, oh, let's put everything in here, and the kitchen sink. Because we talk about a little bit of everything, it's like you don't have time to care about any one thing. So it's hard to get motivated to care and to leave the show going, I'm going to do something about this in my own community. It's a lot. Most stories pick one point and just do a deep dive. Dear Evan Hansen deals with suicide and all the ramifications about lying about what really happened with all, that much more concise kind of story. I'm not saying Dear Evan Hansen's a better musical, by the way. I'm just saying maybe it would be better if they had just picked the painkiller rape problem and drop the rest. So one thing I didn't talk about yet is, how are Alanis Morissette's songs used in this show? Well, it's most of the most of the tracks from Jagged Little Pill. But they also have an Uninvited in here. That's not from that album, but it's one of Alanis's biggest hits. So of course they're going to have it in here. And there's a couple songs that are written just for this show. So if you are a huge fan, even you will go, I've never heard this song before. It's because it's brand new for the show. Um, I think the biggest problem jukebox musicals have as a group is how do you naturally, organically fit the songs into the narrative so they don't feel like they were reverse engineered. It's like, let's see, oh, it kind of fits. Look at this square peg and this round hole. They don't quite match up. This is a mixed bag. After Frankie cheats on Joe and they have a confrontation later, Joe sings You Ought to Know to Frankie. That is the perfect use of that song. That was the one song I was not worried about. I'm like, this song is so easy. It's got that you broke my heart. I'm mad at you. I'm gonna have revenge sex. Angry sex. Like it. Breakup songs are just so easy to write narratively. So that was a good use of that song. Uninvited. That sequence is amazing. MJ, the scene where she actually overdoses. She's sitting alone on the couch and she has this really cold, unflattering lighting on her. It's very sterile and unforgiving. And a body double dancer shows up. So they do this wonderful duet dance of there's two MJs. There's MJ, the one we know, and then her like dance double. And you can interpret this scene a couple of different ways. Is she's overdosing, but what's going on with her? Why is there two of her? Is she ripping herself into two? Is she having an outer body experience where she's left her body and she's looking at her writhing self? It's really beautiful, very lyrically done, very nice. That's a very good use of Uninvited. There's other songs. I feel like they're like, we have to put this song in here, but how do we do it? Ironic is one of my favorite songs ever. That's actually what led me to buy the original album back in 1995. But when you listen to the lyrics of Ironic, you're like, I don't know how does that fit into a show at all? In the show, Frankie is also a poetry writer. And so she's in her class. It's the last class before they go on winter break for Christmas. And she's like, oh, I've written this poem. And her job is to read in front of the class so they can help her edit it. I guess they take turns writing a creative piece. And then they take turns learning how to critique it and workshop it and make it its best versions of itself. I guess that's what this English class, creative writing class, is supposed to be. So she's sitting up there and she's like, I wrote this little poem. And so she's reading through song, Ironic. And the joke is the students keep interrupting her, going, that's not irony. Because Alanis Morissette did get a lot of flack back in the day because her lyrics don't make sense about what irony is. So maybe this is Alanis going, I heard you. I heard your criticism. I know a lot of the examples I name are not actual examples of irony. It's more, oh, doesn't it suck when bad things happen to someone for like no apparent reason? I thought that was kind of weak. I didn't really appreciate it. The instrumentation of it wasn't bad. I didn't care that it was students singing it together and breaking it into chunks. That's all fine. It's just it didn't really fit narratively into the show. I felt like they were like, we have to put Ironic in here. So they just that's the best they could do. I don't know. Other songs were just more powerful. Like towards the end of the show, they sing No. It's at a rally that Frankie's put together on Bella's behalf. And this was the scene where they're holding up signs throughout almost the entire show. But this is the scene where they're holding them up, because they decided, let's focus on Bella. We've spent all this time talking about this horrible thing that happened to her. And the song No fits perfectly into that thematically. It's like, no means no. If she says no, you're not having sex. Sit up and listen and respect that. That was a good use of the signs. So that's a very good use of that song. And then the very last song of the show is You Learn. What a perfect song to end on. If this is a show that's all about checking your privilege or checking your pronouns or checking something, being a better version of yourself, helping make society treat people that are different in some fashion better, learning not to be so hard on yourself, to not force yourself into this mold that society wants you to be. you learn fits perfectly with answering all of those things. So it's a mixed bag for me, in terms of how the songs are used. Now, another thing that I really, really liked in the song Smiling, the entire song is done backwards. Not the song itself, but the action on stage. We're following Mary Jane. She's at the end of her day, but we go all the way back to the beginning of her day. She's even walking backwards. And everyone else around her is walking backwards. She passes people on the street, they're walking backwards. She's in the grocery store, she's putting things out of her cart back onto the shelf. It's so well done. It was hauntingly beautiful. I've read some critics say that came across as gimmicky. I don't see it that way. I think that's just showing how strung out on drugs she is. That's a good way to visually explain the whole look at her, she's strung out on drugs, right? That was so good. So good. Trying to think what else. To me, those are the bigger numbers. All the other numbers are like, yeah, they're here and they fit, they're fine. Um, yeah, there's a lot with this show. I had such a good time. The show is so funny. As serious as these topics are, that doesn't mean they don't have moments of brevity. They are very good at showing you something very serious, like MJ. At one point, she slaps Nick because she doesn't want him to report what he saw happen to Bella. Because all she's thinking about is, oh, they might think of you as an accomplice, and this will ruin your reputation. It'll follow you for the rest of your life. It'll hurt your chances of getting a good job. Da 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 da. That's very deep and very real. But then they have other moments of levity. But I do think it's at the wrong expense. So the one thing I do want to touch on that has to do with the non-binary character versus cis, is she cis lesbian? Again, I agree with, if you wrote her as non-binary, own it and be clear and cast someone who's non-binary to play the role. That's very important because they need roles too. But the problem is I don't like how they wrote them. Why is Frankie bisexual and she technically has a girlfriend and then she cheats on her with a boy? Why do they keep writing bisexuals like this? They are not all cheaters, but I feel like that's all the media has room for. I'm glad if we're gonna have a love triangle, it's so nice that it's not one girl and two men are fighting over her. That's so tiresome. I'm glad it's flipped, but it's not two girls fighting over a boy. It's a girl who loves a girl and a boy at the same time. That's refreshingly different, and I love that. But I don't like that she's the only open bisexual character in this plot, and she's the one who commits, she's cheating. MJ and Steve have their marital problems, but neither of them are cheating. Why not make that one of them? That would probably be more realistic. I just feel like if you're in the LGBTQ plus community, not only should you be fighting for representation, but the representation should reflect what you're really like. Being bisexual does not make you a cheater. So I don't appreciate Frankie being written that way. It makes her very unlikable. I don't like the character, but I don't like her for a couple reasons. I feel like they're just like, look, we got a black person in our show, and she's going to hold up all the signs saying things like, does my period make you uncomfortable? We're here, we're queer, get used to it. Oh, me too. It just comes across as so hollow and disingenuous. Why are we making her a cardboard cutout of an idea of a person? She doesn't feel like a person. She feels like a caricature. And Joe, everyone loves Joe. Everyone who saw the original Broadway production, they love Joe. I want to, but again, it feels like they're forcing her, like, oh, I'm not different because I'm different. I'm trans. Why don't you listen to me and see how it really is? It just feels like this is what a cis person sees. Did you have a non-binary person write this? Because it just comes across as like you have no clue what you're talking about. I'm not an expert at all, but what I saw just felt very flat, very fake. So I want non-binary people to be on stage, but let's write them a role that is befitting them. Let's actually give them a human to play. Like what I said at the top of this review, what I like about Mary Jane is she's not an ingenue. She's not the wise old sage. And she's trying to pretend to be perfect, but she is flawed. She is such a real person. And I see a lot of me in her. I mean, there's a lot of things she does that I'm like, I don't do that. But I can relate because she looks like me. We're both straight, white, cis, female, heterosexual, whatever you want to call it. We're the same enough where I'm like, I got to see myself. Isn't that wonderful? But other people need to see themselves too. So if you're going to be a show that wants to preach, you want to bring up all these topics, that's fine. Either give them the attention they deserve, do your research so they feel more heartfelt, or maybe not, don't do all of them at once. A lot of people are saying this is the most woke musical since Hair. Uh, I don't know if that's something to be proud of. You don't want to just be like, we're so woke. Oh, way to go, us. So tiresome. I can handle social commentary. I mean, I prefer to go to the theater or to a movie or read a book or watch a TV show to escape all that noise. But there's certainly room for it. The reason media uses these platforms is because people are seeking entertainment. And so hopefully you can get some messaging in there so that there's this call to arms and people can be better versions of themselves. They can improve their community. That's all great. I just think this show did it a little sloppily and it was just a little too in your face, but it was so half-assed. Like, do the work, pick the topics that you really care about and give them some more support. That's all. Is it a horrible show? No. But this tiny little stupid disclaimer of like, there's a few things in here that some might find upsetting. Even that just feels so soft and lazy. I would have it in bigger print and bold it and say, there are very adult things in here. Prepare yourself. We're not trying to offend, but we are trying to wake you up. We are trying to evoke change. Something that's just a little bit more direct, not mean, but you could be easily offended. I know for a fact there are people in my life, they would have hated this show because they don't want to hear it. They're not interested in what the left has to say, not to make this political. That was not the case in my performance. The audience I was with, they were very reactionary. They did a lot of and a lot of like they reacted to everything. And I've heard reports that a lot of people have cried during the show because it's so emotional. It is. The promotional tag for the show is something along the lines of some shows you see, but this one you feel. The book has problems that are logistical, but what the show gets right is on an emotional level. So if you go in being open to an emotional experience, to have an emotional response, I think you'll get that. And it'll probably feel good. The last thing that I really want to touch on that I actually don't like about the show is the ending really wraps up everything in a nice little bow. Like everyone's friends again and everyone's recovering. They're not all the way better, but they're fine. I don't know. Most people who get cheated on, they're not really palsy wowsy with that person later. I think that's a little far-fetched. It's a nice idea. But for a show that's trying so hard to be real, that ending feels very like, oh, we got to have the whole, they lived happily ever after. I didn't think that's what this show was trying to do. Subscribe to some formulaic, narrative thing that other shows and media does. There's nothing wrong with a happy ending. I just thought the show was going to be brave enough to say sometimes shit happens and you're going to recover, but you're going to be broken at the same time. You know what I mean? So I know that very deep. I really wanted to dive in because this is a fairly new show. A lot's being said about it. It has its problems, but I don't think you should write it off. I think if you're open, if you've listened this long and you're open at all to experiencing some things, there are some beautiful things going on in this show, and it's a good time. My audience loved it. It was a packed house. I took my 12-year-old because I think she's old enough to understand grown-up concepts. We had a nice little chat. She's not uncomfortable with anything. She has a good grasp on it. I wouldn't bring kids that are less than 10 years old. It's definitely adult. A lot of swearing. They don't show the rape, but they talk about it at length. And there's a segment that they do this thing with the digital screens and with people being mean on social media. Again, it's that whole victim blaming the evils of social media, that's all heavily visualized. It's not a subtle show. If you can handle a blunt object coming at you, this is a good show for you. If everything I describe makes you go, wow, thank you for letting me watch your video instead of watching this show, well, I'm happy to oblige. But I do think everyone should give it a chance. I think it's worth your time. I really do. So it's on tour right now, at least until August of this year, 2023, I believe. It might get an extension or it might come back later. Uh, just give it a thought. But I wanted to talk about this because there was a lot to talk about, as you can see from the runtime of this video. But I had a good time. I recommend it, flaws and all, because there's nothing that's flawless on this planet, which is a lesson learned in this show. So I hope you enjoyed that. I thank you for clicking on this, and I'll see you next time. Bye.